Hey everybody, welcome to another CS135 assignment. And of course, the news we recently received was that Jimmy Garoppolo, the 49ers quarterback, is now signed to the Las Vegas Raiders. So of course, once again, we're going to work on this currency exchange because why wouldn't anybody want to come to Las Vegas to watch Raiders play? And the same issue like before, we're going to have people come from all around the world and they're going to have to exchange the currency from whatever their local currency is into US dollars. So this has the same type of logic in this program, except in this one, we're going to be reading spreadsheet files or CSV files, and we're going to populate a set of arrays instead. And using these arrays, we're going to do searching on these arrays and being able to convert everything accordingly. So I'm going to go ahead and go over all the details in this assignment. So let's go ahead and get to it. So the input in this program, so you're going to have to read in three CSV files and parse them accordingly. So the first you're going to have to do is you have to first read in a file name. And of course, you're going to reprompt for this file if that doesn't exist. So that's the standard looping structure. You loop while it's not open, the file stream. Once it's open, you're going to read a CSV file. And this first CSV file is going to be just this currency code and exchange rate. So what you can do is, how you can look at this is each line of a CSV file contains a currency code as a string, followed by a comma, followed by exchange rate as a double, and then it ends with a new line character. And you have to store these into these two arrays. So essentially, this would be a two-dimensional array, but remember, you're not able to have a 2D array where one column would contain all strings and the other column contains all doubles. So you're going to have these two arrays, which are going to sort of represent really, it's going to be logically one 2D array. And of course, I will go ahead and draw this up after I cover all this input stuff, so that way you can kind of see what's going on. So anyway, let's go ahead and open up the CSV file so we can kind of see what's going on. And yes, I'm watching South Park right now, so anyway, there's that. So let's go ahead and open up this first CSV file. So anyway, this file contains exactly, so we have really, the first column always contains the currency code and the amount. So I think this is Australian dollar, that's the euro, Great Britain pound, Japanese yen. Also, I apologize if I didn't cover every nation's currency. This file took a long time to generate. So I picked around 30 sort of currency codes. I picked a few countries in each continent to try to have a nice representation here. But anyway, so we can see here that here's Australian dollar. And then if I multiply the Australian dollar amount by 0.6924, it's going to give us the equivalent US dollars. So same idea like assignment 5. So this entire first column has to be stored into that string array. So right here, this currency codes array, we got to store that entire column in there. And in that second column from this file, that's going to go into an element of this other array. Now, what you want to do is you want it where the currency code at index 0 should contain this string AUD for Australian dollar. An exchange rate index 0 has to contain that number. So these two arrays, using that index, that's how we sort of glue these two columns into one logical 2D array. So for example, currency codes index, so I guess this is 0, 1, 2. So currency code index 2 should contain GBP, so Great British Pound. And then exchange rate index 2, 0, 1, 2, contains that number. So you can see how these two arrays, using the array index, is able to kind of glue these together. That's going to be the first input file. Now, you're going to declare two arrays using this size constant. So I would just say set size to 100. Because remember, these arrays are not dynamically allocated. They're static. They're non-dynamic arrays. So since we're not using vectors for this assignment, we're going to have just a size 100 array, respectively, and we're going to maintain a separate counter that tells us how many elements in this exchange rates and currency codes are actually going to be used. So most likely, as you read from this file, there's going to be 30 currency codes and 30 exchange rates. So you're going to have a separate counter that will increment by 1 after reading every line from the input file. So remember, you do a get line, using the string find function, substring function, and so forth to split that line into 2 substrings. And you have to, of course, store them into these variables. Now, also, there's a way to convert a string to a double. So I will also discuss that later on in this video as well. But you're going to have this counter increment after every get line you do. So that counter you're going to have will contain the value 30. So from 0 to 29 will be actually used. And then indices from 30 to 99 are going to be not used. That's the way we work around this, since you don't have dynamic arrays. Okay, let's go ahead now discuss the other input files. So for our second input file, we're going to have another spreadsheet file. And each line, so again, you have to read in a file name from the standard input from CM and reprompt if that file name is not found. And of course, you just have that while loop again, same idea like you do for the first input file. And once you have it open up, once your input file is opened, you're going to essentially read in this file that contains essentially several lines. Each line contains an airport code, a comma, and a currency code. Now, these will both be strings. So now you actually can store these into a 2-dimensional array where you have 2 columns and you have an arbitrary amount of rows. Let's go ahead and open up this input file so we can see what's going on here. There we are. So we're going to have this file called, let's see, I think it's called airports. There we are, airports.csv. So this one has, well, we have 71 lines. So of course you can have a separate counter. So you do a get line. And of course you're going to split the line into 2 substrings. You're going to store them respectively into each column of a particular row. You have a separate counter that increments after every line you read. So you know exactly how many elements in the array you're going to actually look at. So that counter will contain the value 71 at the end of the day. So what's going to happen here is this first column is going to be stored, I guess, in the spreadsheet file. This first column is stored into column 0 of our 2-dimensional array. This is going to be airport codes. And then the second column is going to be the currency of that region. So this LHR, I don't know what these airport codes are, but LHR is an airport in England. So in England, their currency is a British pound. And then I'm not sure, I think this one is for Saigon in Vietnam, and then that's the currency in Vietnam. So I guess that's, I'm not sure what that, I think this is probably France, I'm guessing. I'm not sure. I'm not exactly sure. It could be a trick. But anyway, each of these here is, I think this is for Dublin, Ireland. This is an airport in Ireland, and of course they use euros in Ireland. So there we go. So the idea is that the first column gives you the airport, and then this is the actual the currency in that region. So you're going to have to, use this to be able, because in this input, you're going to be reading, so for a third input file, you're going to be reading in airport codes. You have to sort of figure out, based on the airport the person came from, you got to figure out which currency you have to convert into. But anyway, so you store this into the first column of the array. Second column, there'll be a total of 71 total rows used. From row 72 to 100 is going to be sort of garbage, because once again, since we don't have a vector, we're going to have, this is going to be our loop around, or a workaround, if you will. Okay, let's go ahead now and discuss our third input file. Okay, so the third input file is going to, once again, you have to read in the file name and reprompt if it's not openable. Once you have it open, this is going to be a transaction file. You will not actually read this into an array, but you're going to just simply process each line as you read it in. So I'm going to cover this part in the next section of this video. So every single line in this input file contains airport code, comma, amount. I don't know how the space got this, my mistake, but there's no actual space, it's just airport code, comma, airport, and amount. So the way you can actually look at his input file, this is right here. So here's my transaction 1. So you can see here, every line, so there's going to be a lot of lines, so maybe a few hundred of these. So what's going to happen in this one is you're going to have an airport code, and then followed by a second column will be an amount. So you got to figure out, based on the airport code, what currency you need to, what currency is this number going to be in? And then once you know what currencies, you have to find exchange rate from that currency to US dollars. So I'm going to go ahead and show you using the arrays how you can actually think about working this out. So I'm going to discuss this actually right now, and then I'm going to go over just the main algorithm you have to use for this program. Okay, so suppose we have this these arrays set up. Now clearly this is actually a subset of the input files. So I think I have like 30 or so lines in the spreadsheet file for the currency code exchange rate file. But I'm going to only have just a few because just so it's easier to draw this whole thing up. So obviously we have a size 100 array, but we're going to only use from 0 to 6. So this currencies variable, this counter, tells me how far in the array I want to go. So clearly for assignment 6, you're going to have this be 30, I would believe. At 30, I think that's how many lines there are. So this would be 30 actually. So you have 0 to 29 would be actually used, and anything beyond that would be unused. Now for the airports file, same thing. You have this two-dimensional array. So that first column of that spreadsheet file goes into this area, and that second column goes into this area right there. Same idea. It's you have 100 elements max, but this counter tells you how many elements you're going to use. There's 11 elements stored in this array, but I believe in the CSV file, it has 71 lines, I believe. But again, I'm using a subset because so it's easier to visualize. So I'm trying to like draw out how you're going to do this. So anyway, once you have these arrays populated, you have your counter set up so you know how far to go. The next step is going to be your transactions file. So each row contains an airport location, and then comma, an amount. So suppose we have this amount, this line. We're going to do a get line, obviously. We're going to split this into two strings because we want to split it by a comma. And then we want to search for the airport. So GMP is our airport. So you have to search this airports array. So of course we'll have our loop where our counter I is set to 0, and while I is less than airport amount. So in this case 11, but of course airport amount will be 71 for your program. So we're going to first have I be 0, and we're going to first look at this element. So column 0 is going to be the actual airport name. So right there, our column 0 for row 0 contains LHR, not GMP. So that was not a match. So linear search, we're going to try the next element. So we're going to loop through everything, all the rows of this matrix. And we're going to now look at the next element. Remember how this search works. We have our I counter. I is going to cycle through every single row. And we're going to constantly look at the 0th column each time. So in this row 1, column 0 contains SGM, which is not GMP. So we try the next row. So you can see how the loop is going to iterate through all this. Look at this row next. We see again, not a match. That I counter increments by 1. Again, not a match because this does not contain GMP. And then right here in row 4, column 0, it contains GMP. So you found a match. So we found the airport. And in column index 1, this right here gives us the currency code for that airport. So now what we have to do is we have to figure out what's the exchange rate for this currency. So we had to iterate through this array until you finally find one of these. So one of these column zeros, so one of these elements matches the airport name. Then next column gives us the currency. Using this currency KRW, I have to search this array for KRW. So what I'm going to do is, again, have another loop, which is going to have it start off at index 0, and this loop counter I will be at 0, I less than currencies, which is going to cycle through everything in this array right there. So the first element is not KRW, so it's not a match. Then we have our next element right there we'll look at. Again, not a match. Then our next element over, Great British Pounds, not a Great Britain Pounds, not a match. Then our next one over, not a match. And then next element over, again, not a match. And so forth. So this is kind of how the loop is going to cycle through all the elements in the structure. Again, not a match. And the last element in the array in this particular instance, we found a match. So right there, we found the currency. So we first, just to recap, we searched this array at column 0 for matching airport name. Then using the currency in column 1, we have to search this array for that currency. And we found that currency code index 6. So we have to store index 6 somewhere so we know which element in this other array we have to look at, because index 6 of this array is going to really be the exchange rate for that currency. So you can see here, so the index 6 currency, KRW, then index 6 of this exchange rates array is going to tell you the exchange rate for this currency. So now we have the rates. We retrieve this. Then we have to convert this into a number. So you have to already convert stuff into a number earlier as you're reading from your file. But it's very simple. All you have to do is take this string as a number and pass it into a function like this. So you have strtod, and this would probably be some kind of a string variable. So I'm going to call this s. So imagine we have it stored in a string variable s. You would do s.c_str null. That converts, suppose that s contains the string that contains 423650. This is going to return the actual numerical representation of this string. So again, I use this string variable .c_str because this, I believe this function actually might use, it might need you to convert this into a C style string. I'm not sure, I'm not 100% sure, but if I remember correctly. Now again, you don't have to use this function to convert. Any function that works is fine, but this is the one that I sort of know of off the top of my head. So this will convert any string. It will return it as a double. So of course, what you do now is you're going to essentially take this number, multiply it by 0.0008. That's going to be a US dollar amount. And of course, you have to output the transaction number, followed by, you have to actually output this amount, and then output the US dollar equivalent, which I'll show you the sample output later. So that's how you have to process this. And now what's going to happen after you process that one transaction, now you have to do a get line again to read this line. So in this situation, what's going to happen is obviously DDD is the, I think, the name of the debugger that's used in CS218, but that is not an actual currency that we have in our list. So what's going to happen, or sorry, this is actually not an airport, sorry, in our list. So if we use DDD, we obviously would search every single row. Again, we start over again. We search every single row of this, and none of the column zeros would match. So in that case, you want to output to the output file that you have an invalid airport code. So you have to also check for that as well. So if you search the entire structure, you didn't find a match, output invalid into your output file. And so that way, this one would be taken care of. Now, our next get line over here, we read the next line. Of course, you have to separate this into two strings. And of course, you verify that this right here, this is actually not a valid number. So you output that it's invalid. So another way you can do this is this function, strtod. If it can't convert the string into a number, it's going to return 0. So there actually is no infile.fail to worry about. So I know when you did invalid numbers, it would be a fail state, but a get line is able to read literally anything. So there's not going to be an actual fail state to worry about. But this function, if I try to do something like this, if I try to say strtod, I pass in hello and then null, this will return 0, which means that it couldn't convert. So if your number, whatever this function returns is 0 or less, you can assume that's an invalid, because an invalid number, or a negative even, isn't a valid currency amount. So you can, of course, use that result. If it returns 0, you can use that as an invalid number on that line. So that's sort of the idea for how to process each line. So you get the airport code, you search this list, if you find a match at some point, you look at the currency amount the next column over, you search that currency in this list, you store which index you found that currency, so you know which index in this exchange rates array to look at. So for example, let's say if I had the case where, let's say this was actually a valid number, let's say if I had, let's say 44 or something, then what you have to do is you have to simply search this array once again for SGN. So index 0 is not a match, index 1 is not a match, but index 2, this column 0 does have a match. So you have to simply search everything in column 0. Actually, sorry, column index 1, sorry, index 1 is a match, SGN, which is going to be VND. So you want to store this, searches for VND. Now, obviously, this is actually a small case right there, but anyway, that's sort of what you have to do. So now let's go ahead and go over the sample output and some final remarks for the assignment. Okay, so let's go ahead and discuss this main algorithm. So the first two steps, we have to read in the files. So the first step is you read in that currency exchange file, and you're going to populate those two 1D arrays, that currency codes and the exchange rates. Remember, those two parallel 1D arrays you're going to be working with. Then step 2, you read in that file name for the airport, the currency code CSV file, and then populate that 2D string array. So that I already kind of discussed that, so nothing too new there. Step 3, you have to, of course, read in your transactions file and, of course, reprompt. And then once you have it open, then just kind of don't do anything at the moment. Step 4, you want to open up an output file stream. You don't have to read in the file name from the user, just hard code output.csv. All you have to do. So now, step 5, that's going to be where we're going to start doing actual work. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to create this transaction counter, because you want to have a transaction number 1, transaction 2, 3, 4, 5. You want to output each transaction to the screen. So you're going to have this counter to do that. Now in step 6, you're going to essentially read one line of a transaction file. Remember, in that line, it contains an airport code, followed by a comma, followed by an amount. It's a numerical amount. It's going to be in a string, obviously, but you're going to convert that, but you're going to read that line. And then you're going to, of course, separate that string. You're going to get the, you're going to separate the airport code from that, from the numerical amount. So then you're going to output to the screen. You can output, not to the screen, so you're going to output to the output file. You can output transaction, and then you can output, transaction space using the output operator. You're going to output that transaction counter. So you can output transaction space 1 or transaction space 2 based on what that counter is. And then you're going to output a comma. So this step 7 outputs the first column of a row of that output file. Then step 8, convert that number into a numerical type, because amount would be a string, and you want to convert that into a decimal. And of course, if a value is 0 or less, output invalid amount, then output a new end of line character, and then jump to step 13, which I'll go over in a second. Then step 10, so let's say if it is a valid number, then just skip and then continue to the next step, which is step 10. You want to, of course, using that error code, you want to search that 2-dimensional string array, remember, for that error code, and you want to get that currency code that's associated to the error code, just like what I covered a second ago, that algorithm I covered just a second ago. You want to do that right here. So you want to go ahead and find that currency code, then search a currency code array to get that exchange rate, just using that method I just showed you. And then you want to go ahead and convert that amount, this value, and multiply that value by the exchange rate. Now, again, if that error code is not found, then output airport not valid, and then go on to the next step, or go on to step 13. But if, let's say, everything is okay, the value is positive, and you're able to find that airport code, then compute the USD amount and output that to the output file within end of line character. Step 13, increment your transaction counter by 1 and go to step 16, or sorry, step 6. Now, of course, this is going to loop, so this part will be a loop essentially. Now, of course, if you have end of file, then jump to step 14, which means you just simply close the input-output file streams and end the program. So that's basically how this works. So again, I think this is mostly self-explanatory, except I think step 10 would have been relatively hard to understand. So I went over that sort of earlier, that one algorithm to actually do this, because I think this would have been a little bit tough to read this and understand it. Let's go ahead and now just sort of do a sample run so we can see kind of how this is going to work. Okay, so here's our first transactions file. You can see here, we have our airport codes and the amount of money we want to exchange US dollars. Notice how some of these lines, so in this line 20 is the 0, which is not a valid currency amount. There's probably some negative numbers here and there, I believe, as well. Also right here, not valid. So we'll see some error cases. I think also there's a few airport codes that are not in the list of recognized airport codes that we have in our original input files. So let's go ahead and see how this works. So I'm going to compile my code. Let's run this. So we first enter our currency conversion file. I'm not going to show you how the reprompting works, because I think you know how that would work. So anyway, I can enter invalid ones. So I'll just say for now, like let's say currencies.csv. It's invalid file names. So okay, final enter. I think it's currency codes.csv. That's a valid one. And of course, for airport codes, I could just say airports, not a valid file name. Let's say airports.csv. It takes it. And again, I guess I'll just put in this transactions.csv. So nothing outputs to the screen. All the output will happen in the output.csv file. So it's a file that we're supposed to automatically just open a file stream called, or open an output file stream called output.csv. Let's go ahead and check it out. So here it is. So it's opening, and I think it's right there. So I'm just sort of, okay, my mouse is really acting up on me. So there we are. Okay, so for each transaction, notice I have transaction 1, transaction 2, so I have this counter, and then this is basically the amount of currency, and that's going to be the equivalent US dollar amount. So I output in the first column the transaction, and then followed by the counter, so transaction space counter, then a comma, and then if the amount is valid, and this airport is valid, you output the currency of whatever currency that's supposed to be equals the equivalent US dollar amount. And then for the next transaction, same idea. Transaction 2, you put in, this is the amount of money. I think there's actually a little bit of an error when I read the file right here. So this will be interesting how that's going to get resolved, because it's supposed to be 117004, but it has it as a little bit off. So it must be the conversion that might be a little bit of an issue. So, okay. I'll see how I can sort of deal with that on code grade, see what happens. But maybe it's just the strtod might have some type of an error, but if it's the same error for everybody, then it shouldn't be a problem. So I ran this actually on code grade with this, and it matched with mine perfectly. So I'm going to go ahead and just say that as long as you use a Linux-based system, it should be fine. And of course, going forward, So LH I think is in England. So for transaction 4, it outputs 247.7 Great Britain pounds equals that much in US dollars. That's all you have to do. And of course, on some transactions, so on transaction 20, it's invalid amount. Let's see what else. See if I can sort of pick this apart. Invalid amount again a few times. I think the transactions 2 I had, that one has cases where you had invalid airport code. So transaction 1 has invalid amounts. Transactions 2 has invalid airport codes, and transactions 3 has no errors at all. So anyway, this is going to be tested on code grade. So essentially, for every line you read, I'll put transaction number, comma, and either invalid number, invalid airport, or if it's everything is okay, I'll put the currency of that local currency wherever this airport's from, and then equals the correct equivalent US dollar amount. So that's pretty much all you have to really do for your program. So I hope this video did give you a better idea as to how to approach this. And of course, happy coding, and till next time.